Hello and welcome back. I'm going to be in a conversation today with someone who's very, very eminent from the insurance sector to speak about how technology is very rapidly revamping and helping the insurance sector reimagine business processes that are attempting more and more and in significant measure to put the customer at the very center of all its processes. And to talk to me about how all of this is happening and the evolving landscape, please put your hands together to welcome Deepu KV, who's the president, head of operations and customer service at Bajaj Allianz. Deepu, welcome, sir. Delighted and privileged.
Thank you, Arjun. I think the warmth and your energy, are equally compelling. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Deepu, I'm going to directly jump into this. If we've heard or learned lessons over the last 2 years, it's one of the primary ones has been that apart from resilience and so on and so forth, it's been that technology has been the enabler of many, many things that we perhaps did not imagine we could do with the flair and the flourish that we've managed to. Now, if we were to take those lessons forward, how do you see the role of technology having evolved specifically in the insurance sector? And how do you see this journey progress as we move along into the future?
Yeah. Thank you, Arjun. I'll break it into two parts. Like you said, one is a rear view mirror and the other is, crystal ball gazing. So if you look at, what's happened in the last couple of years, I think by now, we all have seen it. I think the whole accent on digitizing the entire landscape, had to come to the fore. For the laggards, they had to play catch up. And for the leaders, they were pretty much in vogue even before the onset of the pandemic. Now, if you look at the whole, customer experience, life cycle in general insurance, see the whole process starts with policy issuance. And this is a distribution-led business model. So when you had work from home and when you had, lockdowns and people couldn't meet to exchange paper, I think, in the whole paperless setup, the fact that distributors could continue to issue policies and service customers using the devices at their end, be it portals or be it tabs. I think that clearly showed, that digitization was here to stay because the core insurance product, which is delivery of the policy, was happening through distributors and devices.
Yes.
Then when you look at, the whole customer servicing life cycle, once the customer comes on board, after sales service, when contact centers couldn't function, you had the whole set of, digital assets coming to the fore, whether it was WhatsApp, whether it was the AI-driven chatbot, website, portal, mobile app, so on and so forth. I think, it just continued, seamlessly. And then you come to claims, which is the moment of truth in insurance. For example, if you look at motor claims, earlier in case you crashed your car, you would have had to ask for a physical surveyor to come to the site. Today, you don't need to do that. You just have to click photographs, upload them using the mobile app, and up to certain amounts, we have a conversation with the customer. He gives his consent and the amount is transferred in 20 minutes. So that's how, we've been able to, revolutionize that. And going forward, Arjun, I see two things happening. Earlier, the accent was on digitizing the physical. Now it has shifted to humanizing the digital. How do you ensure that, you give the efficiency and the efficacy of bots, yet, you give the empathy and, healing touch, that a customer requires. So that's one. And the other is, when you look at the entire digital landscape, the language by default is English. But given that, we are talking about, taking it to the hinterland of India, how do you ensure that, you also become multilingual? Multilingual across the entire landscape and across, all devices and touch points. So that's a summary of, the past, and the future.
No, indeed, and I think it's very supremely articulated because increasingly as we look at the insurance sector and there are so many facets and so many parts of the operation, one of the things also that we are observing is the huge inflow or the generation of data from across social media, from your own customers, your own mining, and so on and so forth. In that sense of the term, Deepu, how do you see technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning play an increasing role, especially in the prospects or the analysis of premium setting for let's say life insurance or subsequent claims processing? How does that kind of evolve as you're seeing it happen in front of you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So Arjun, I'll explain this, from 2 points of view. The first is, to the point that you made around, the surge in data, right? Because the footprint is digital and therefore, the inflow of data is also, is huge. Now, the whole point is, whether you deploy AI or whether you deploy, a range of tools, the whole idea is, how can you ingest data, in its multiple factors, right? You have, You have, for example, normal text, which comes in the form of paper. Then you have, videos, then you have, images, right? How do you ingest this data? And the other is also storage, right? All the security implications which come in, right? So that's something, which firms have to manage. Not only are the regulatory guidelines, but you also have to take care of, customer consent and, customer expectations. So clearly, I think that's one angle in terms of, managing, data across the entire life cycle. The other aspect is, coming to how we use AI. So let's, for example, look at our customer service angle, and I spoke about how when contact centers were not operational, for example, our AI-driven, chatbot came to the fore. And for customers to make it easy, we gave them, WhatsApp as a gateway, because India's mobile content, a lot of people are comfortable with WhatsApp. So you log into WhatsApp and our AI-driven bot is there, and then you basically get your queries answered. And what we also did in order to ensure that customers, have a seamless experience, in case the AI-driven bot could not answer a query on the spot, the chat wouldn't get terminated. It would get seamlessly handed over to a human being, who would then take it through to completion. And then, by using NLP and AI, we keep an inventory of all the areas where the bot could not answer, where the human being had to pitch in. And then we keep teaching the bot. And the bot keeps learning, and its own percentage of first-time query resolution is on the increase. The other is I gave you the example of motor claims, where I said in case you crashed your car, you don't need to, for up to certain amounts, you don't need to call a surveyor. You have to basically upload photographs of the damaged car using your mobile app and then upload them. And then we have an AI engine, which kicks in, which basically assesses the images, and it can get very granular. What is the extent of the dent? Is it 60% deep, so on and so forth? Does the part need to be repaired? Does the part need to be replaced? It gets very granular. And within a matter of 20 minutes, like I told you, it can relay a message to the customer. This is the extent of damage. Please give me your consent. The customer gives his consent, and then we, proceed. So that's how we have used. The other is we also think of AI, from a customer-facing perspective, but we also use, AI at the back end, right? When it comes to, security, when it comes to even RPA, which is at, let's say, the lower end of the AI spectrum, we also use AI, at the back office to ensure that the customer-facing assets, are able to give a wow experience to customers. So I think today, it's an integral part of the entire landscape.
This is one more interesting observation here is that in the insurance sector, IRDA has also enabled the portability of insurance policies and such, which obviously for the incumbent is quite a nightmare. Now, in that sense of the term, Deepu, how do you leverage technology and process modernization to build and embed loyalty in the very fabric of each interaction?
I think, Arjun, when you talk about portability, when you talk about competitive landscape, when you talk about regulators, when you talk about everything that goes into it, I think our firm belief is ultimately what is good for the customer is good for the industry. I think that's the cardinal principle, right, which we do. Now, from a regulator's perspective, they've enabled, various aspects to the point that you made. One is, they had a sandbox proposal, wherein firms could submit innovative ideas, and without having to go through the whole rigmarole of approvals, right? You could basically set up a POC, and then based on approvals, scale it up. So that's how, the regulator, for example, has helped us. And also committees to look into IoT and, various aspects of, how technology, can help revolutionize the entire landscape. Now, from our perspective, to the point that you made, while I spoke about, how do we digitize the entire landscape? I think the one area, Arjun, how we were able to differentiate ourselves is after having gotten an understanding of customer needs, right, which is today a cliche. Everybody says, start with the customer, understand customer needs. I think one area where we were able to leverage technology was in meeting the unstated needs of customers. And I'll give you a couple of examples.
Yes.
When we spoke to customers and they said, obviously, their core expectation is fast processing of a claim or quick processing of, an insurance policy or any, requirement that they have from us. We also figured out during the pandemic, for instance, that customers, for example, couldn't go to hospital for minor ailments. There was a lockdown and hospitals were obviously prioritizing COVID-19. So we came out with a very simple but a very effective solution. We said, no need to worry. And while it's not our core offering, they could log into our mobile app and have a conversation with our empaneled set of doctors. It could be a video chat, could be a voice chat, it could be a text chat. And once they get a digital consultation, then they just go out and buy medicines. So for customers, it was a wow experience. For minor ailments, they could use our mobile app, use mobile consultation. We call it doctor on chat. It was it was an unstated need. Similarly, I'll give you one more example of how we leverage technology. If you look at telematics, which is where you leverage IoT to basically, come out with connected car. That's a standard offering which most firms have. Now, in the Indian context, we know that many people also use drivers. So we came out with a feature called geofencing. So what happens in geofencing is, if let's say the driver is picking up kids from school and dropping them home to a daycare center, the standard routes, you can mark them digitally. Should you take a third route, you get an alert. Now that is not possible, without the use of technology. So I think that's why, we have leveraged technology to look at nuances in the entire landscape and come out with products which wouldn't be possible without the deployment of, IoT, and the like.
I completely agree, because that also brings me to something that's been prevalent in the West, at least, which is dynamic insurance, which is that based on empirical data of how the car has been driven over certain periods of time, insurance policies tend to fluctuate in a certain dynamic manner. Do you see that being a possibility in India? Because that's obviously technology at the very central part of the entire concept.
Yeah. So I'll take it beyond, the car insurance example, and then overall, just, look at it, from a product agnostic perspective. I think the whole point, Arjun, what we're talking about is customization at scale, right? How do we ensure that, tomorrow, other than, have a one size fits all product or customer, picking up off the shelf, products, how do we basically, give a, let's say, a plug and play option, right? He goes and chooses option. One is based on data and the other is based on, availability of, what is there. Now, there are two aspects there. One, of course, we need to ensure that, we are compliant, from a regulatory perspective, because we need to ensure that, we file with the regulator and, we follow the norms clearly. That's where, for example, the sandbox, proposal can help us, So we had, so for example, there were some proposals, which were given by players where depending on, how the customer's health indicators show up, right? It can translate into, benefits on his policies, right? So these are, products which are, today, part of the entire, package. And if you look at the West, for example, you can, take lessons. So for example, there is a platform in the West, and what happens is very simple. They basically pick up data based on variables from various customers.
True.
And they aggregate that, and sometimes data even comes from insurance companies because they cannot share with one another. This platform then using real-time data will then suggest, products, back to the, insurance community. And then they can come out with products based on real data. So everybody stands to gain. The customer gains, the insurer gains, and, there is this business model which works. So I think that is something which is increasingly going to become a default option, as we progress forward.
And Deepu, also something that is slightly futuristic for India for sure. But as driverless cars come, autonomous cars, what will be the posture of the insurance sector? And I'm just asking you to stargaze for now. Please don't let us in on any sensitive information.
Right.
What will the posture be?
Yeah, in fact, I think, there's already been, a lot of, debate on this because today what happens is, in case, there is a person who's driving the car and, there is an accident, right? And there's a human being, who is held accountable, right? Now, in a driverless situation, right, who is held accountable, right?
Exactly.
Is it the software program, right? And,
that's is it therefore the makers of the software program?
Exactly. So I think, those questions are coming into play. And I think so far, when you look at the debates, right, I think one of the angles which people are bringing into play is ultimately there is somebody who's providing this service, right? So to that extent, the legal landscape recalibrated. I think, those questions are still there. But it's pretty much, an open question. And I think from an Indian perspective, because while you've had some, driverless cars, let's say in the US, in the Indian perspective, I think, we're still some distance away. So
we have time to, if not in a completely nightmare scenario.
Exactly. So I think, we have some time to cover ground there.
No, I couldn't agree more, Deepu, but I do have a view on the clock. My parting question to you is, given your diverse, vast experience in this sector, as you look forward over the next 2 or 3 years, what are some very radical changes that you see in the offing, such as will not just benefit the industry as a whole, but also the customer, which is Arjun Vishwanathan in this case, hypothetically?
Yeah. So I think, Arjun, I touched upon, one earlier, which is this entire, multilingual landscape.
True.
To give you one simple example, if you take crop insurance, for farmers, we came out with an industry-first mobile app, which was exclusively in Indian languages. And that became a lifeline for them, during COVID, because they could use it to get notifications on the weather, they could get pricing notifications, crop advisories, and, it became a huge, boon for them. So I think one is, this entire multilingual landscape. And in multilingual, what is important is, take it through end to end. I met a customer many years back. He said, don't just hook me in, in a language of my choice, but subsequently the literature comes to me, is in the standard languages.
Correct.
End to end, how do you make it multilingual, in the digital landscape? I think that's clearly a challenge, for, many players, because you don't have ready off the shelf solutions available, so that's one. The other, Arjun, I think, we are increasingly going to see, voice and video, right? Because we all have seen, the usage of, text, but increasingly, as I said, video is the new book, so, we are seeing that, already happening, various form factors, going into voice and video. I think, clearly, that's one, trend which we see. The third is to the point that you made earlier, how do you leverage data to customize at scale? You see, earlier you had customization in niches, right? Or you had, a one size fit all product, offered at scale. But I think if you can customize at scale, where customers can truly pick and choose, then you could actually, have a segmentation of one. So I see broadly as these three trends which are possible today and which will obviously, benefit customers.
No, absolutely brilliant. And I stand much the better for having had this dialogue with you, Deepu. We've been truly privileged. I couldn't thank you enough. Thank you so much.
No, I think it was a pleasure talking to you, Arjun. I think, the way you asked the questions and your warmth, just kept me engaged. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, that was I in conversation with Deepu KV from Bajaj Allianz. Stay tuned and we'll be back in the next segment in just a moment.